Welcome, Accomplices. I'm Lynda Norman. I'm a watercolor artist in British Columbia. Today in the studio, I thought we would talk a little bit about creating kind of an interesting landscape using a palette knife, credit card, a little bit of brushwork, and enjoy the lovely play of watercolors. One of my favorite things to paint is a cityscape that's kind of maybe otherworldly. It's not an exact cityscape, but I love that the paints can provide sort of a mysterious feel sometimes and allow a little bit of light play. Today we're going to work on Arche, one of my favorite papers. This is fine grain cold pressed. They call it fine grain. It's 140 pound, 300 GSM paper. This piece, this block is 12 inches by 16 inches, and it's 100% cotton. It's got a bit of tooth still to it, but it's not really, really rough, so it should work well. We're going to use a credit card, palette knife, any straight edge that we can find to create the shapes of the buildings. And one of the fun things that I've discovered is I like to have a moon sort of in some of my cityscapes, and so I found that I've got some glossy white round labels, and they work really well. I've got other labels that that don't work quite as well because they tend to leave a little bit of the glue on the surface of the paper, which I've used in the past as a bit of texture, which often does work really well. But I think for today's purposes, we will just use a little label, and you can buy these in all kinds of sizes. And as usual, I don't draw out my design. I sort of think about where I would like to place things. The example that I showed at the beginning has a moon sort of over in this area here. Maybe today we'll put a moon sort of up in this area, and I'll put the white. It's hard to see, of course, but it is glossy. I'm not going to burnish it down. I just want it to be there to act as a resist, so that the paint that I'm putting on for my sky isn't going to cover in that spot, and it may seep under the edges a tiny bit, which is just great. I can work with that to bring some clouds in when I need to. So now that I've got my little moon in place, I'm going to wet my page. This is on a block, so it's going to be not as buckly as sometimes paper is. I didn't tape this one off. I often do, but with a cityscape like this, there's not going to be a lot of detail right to the end and the edge of the paper. So when I want to put a mat on it, I probably will, not have to worry about cutting off any of my design. So I'm going to wet the whole page. I love using a big brush for wetting. These particular brushes, this is a solo brush, a 5-line solo brush from Watercolor Online. I'll put the link in the descriptions for you. It holds a ton of water, lots of coverage. I see often painters have a small round brush, and they're working like crazy to get the water on the page. I like to be gentle with my paper. It's 100% cotton. It's delicate. You can scratch your paper, without intending to often, by not being as careful as you can be with your brushes. Even the bits of ferrule on your brushes can scratch if you push too hard and lean your brush over. So I've got my page wet. It's going to sit for just a second. And I see there's a couple of spots where the water hasn't soaked in. It hasn't actually touched the paper. I'm good with that. I love that little bit of dryness adds to some texture as I'm applying the paint. I'm going to just wake up the paints again, just a little more. And I often start with a Mayan Dark Blue for the sky. Because this is, I'm going to call this a moon, not a sun, I don't really want that warm, earthy, yellowy glow in the background so much. That might emanate from a city, and I might decide to put that in a bit later. But I think right now I just want to get some moodiness in my sky. And so I'm going to take some with my 5-line big brush. You could use a hockey brush as well. And I'm just going to mix in my sidewell here some Mayan Dark Blue and some Indanthrone Blue just to brighten that up a tiny bit. It's fairly wet. And I just love that gorgeous, gorgeous color is available with those two colors. The Mayan Dark Blue is that grayer, darker blue, and the Indanthrone just sort of brightens it up a tiny bit. And now that I've got this base coat of that on, my city buildings are going to be probably about a third of the way up. I don't like to do things direct center. I like to keep the rule of thirds in mind. And so I'm going to lighten things as I go down. My buildings will go on top of that light blue. And then down here, if I were to leave it blue, I could turn that into an ocean or a lake or some kind of waterscape in front of the city. I can also add greens and browns to it and turn it into landscape as well. So I'm going to just, because this is going to be a moonscape, I want some darkness in for my sky, and I've just gone in and touched my brush just very gently into the Mayan Dark Blue, and I'm just going to put in some lines of that. That will be sort of like the underside of some clouds perhaps, and if I wisp them up, I can get some nice effects through there. I'm going to use a paper towel and just sort of fold it loosely and just run it across to make some lines of clouds. These are nighttime clouds, and I want them to be a little more linear rather than the nice fluffy cumulus clouds that you see in the daytime. And then I can wisp with the paper towel. It's one of the best tools I think you can have for watercolor. It can be gentle with it and just move your paint along. Let those wisps happen. Those clouds can be lovely and wispy. We'll go in maybe a bit later and add some more with that moon. But for now, I think I'm going to be happy with this city skyscape at this level. And the paint is reasonably dry. If it was pooling and wet, I wouldn't want to take off that, pardon me, that sticker. And just so that I'm not fumbling around on the surface of my damp paper, with my fingers, I'm just going to take my X-Acto knife and lift up my little label. So these are the glossy white round labels from Avery. I'm pretty sure they're available pretty much anywhere. If you're going to try this with other labels, just use a test piece. A little piece of paper on the side, stick the label on, paint over the top, peel it off, see what you think. I've done them before, as I say, with labels, stickers that have left a bit of glue on the back, and I've used that to my advantage rather than try to scrub it off. So there's my little moon. I'll go in later and wisp some of the clouds across the front of it perhaps. But for now, I want to get into the body of my city. I'm just, after having said that, that cloud is bothering me, so I'm going to just let that move a little bit there. So as you know, if you've been following along, I am a big fan of palette knives and credit cards and flat surfaces to give the effects I need. And oops, I have a couple of my favorites. Some cards are firmer, some are more bendy. Find one that feels right in your hand and go with that. I'm just looking here at this place where I put my brush down and it was too wet, and it's starting to cauliflower, starting to bloom, and I'm going to just move that out of the way with my paper towel. I could do the same with a dry brush and just feather out those edges into the rest of the paper, and that will help you get rid of those annoying blooms. It's something you've got to keep an eye on, got to keep a watch for when your paper is wet. It does tend to happen, but it's a great time for you to go in with that damp paper and the beautiful pigments and just sort of encourage them to go where you think you'd like them to go. All right. I'm using the Solo Eco palette, Studio palette. It's got 12 wells, 12 pans, and then 6 mixing wells on the side. I love these because my credit card can fit right in them, so I can dip in and pull my color out just with the edge of the credit card and take it from there. Now I do have smaller bits. I just want to make sure I've got them on hand, ready to go. And I think we are ready. So again, I plan as I go. So sometimes it's just a case of, it's like sitting down to write something, especially in a brand new book, and you're afraid to put that pen down and make that first mark. I think there's always ways around. If you put a mark where you don't think you want it, there's usually a way around it. So let's try. This is called neutral tint, and I just want to. No, it's Payne's blue gray. Pardon me. We'll put some of that on, and so I'm going to start right here. And similar to how we make our branches and our bark on our birch trees, we're going to start to form some buildings. So there's the start. We'll come back and embellish on that one maybe a bit later. This is a larger building, and maybe we have a lower, flatter building. And so this is how we work it. We just go across. Now I'm going to dip into the neutral tint and put another building there. And then we'll pop into some Moonglow. My card isn't touching the pigment completely all the way across, not completely flat across, and that's okay. I'm just picking up some. I can lay it in the side if I want my whole card to pick up. The Moonglow is gorgeous, does help to add, some texture, a little bit of granulation. And I can see where it's not quite wet enough. As I keep wetting my palette, what I like to see is that each well that I'm going to be using has that glossy kind of look to it. When it stops being glossy, it makes it harder to pick up with your credit card. And I try to jog the buildings, make some higher, some lower. You can make towers. If you want, sometimes I've even formed some into being looking like bridges. You can go in with your other colors. And I think at this point I'm going to switch to a smaller piece. And I'm just picking up the colors that I picked up on the edge of my credit card. So there's some Quinacridone Gold and there's still some Moonglow on this, and it's just kind of in a thick blob. And let's take that across. The mixture of the colors as they blend is so beautiful. And then I'm going to take, we talked about when we did other work with the palette knife and with the credit card, about using the back of a piece of photo paper. And that often is really easy to use when you're with your credit card. I find that it gives me more space rather than the wells to dip my credit card in. And because the paper is starting to dry, you're going to get that texture, that granulation, and some spots where the color isn't going to hit. Now this is going to be a nightscape, so that's great because we don't need the windows all to be showing. And I'm going to move this building right down to where this one ended. And then we can start to make a land line, horizon line. And this one's coming down a little bit. And there's that beautiful gold showing up. And then again here. And perhaps we'll make maybe this will be a lake of some sort, and this could be a pier coming out. And so we'll make we'll just make some little posts. And then pull it down for a little bit of reflection in the water. Finish that building off there. And then if I turn it around, I can go and finish the other sides of my building. And here's where I like sometimes to add some interesting color. So here's a lovely bit of purple. We'll add some of that in. This is the Quinacridone Purple. Rub some of that down. And this building is going to be, I'm going to need a bigger piece for this one now because it's more on that side. I'm going to touch in a little bit of the green. And if this is the one side of the building, I'm going to make this one, maybe we'll make this a very tall, narrow tower. These little tabs, as I say, are good for making fence posts, and you can make tower bits, chimney stacks, whatever you need to make on buildings. You can also shape doorways just by laying them in. Again, we just want the hint of what's happening. Maybe this one will have perhaps a double doorway, and maybe it's a large old hotel. And back with the left hand. I promised we'd do that one day, didn't I? Do some. So I'll come back at some point and fiddle around with these buildings probably a bit more. But for now, I've got them in the place where I want them to be. Got my sky where I think I want it to be. And I'm just going to wipe some of these off because you don't want to set them on top of something and have the color come off. This is where the nice flat brushes come in handy. The paper's still a bit damp, but not damp enough for it to really make much difference. If I dampen the brush, I can pull the reflections down into the water. And this one, this building could perhaps come down just a slight bit, and I can encourage that just with the edge of my nice flat brush. This is, again, as well, where a nice firm brush, this is a Lang nickel, and I think that's what it's called. It's actually for acrylics, but it's got a fairly firm bristle to it, whereas watercolor brushes often will be more supple, more soft, more conducive to holding a lot of water. These are more the shapers, and you can, with a very damp brush, you can just touch them in and wiggle them to get them anchored, and then pick up a little bit of the color and pull it across. You'll learn as you go how much water each of your brushes needs to do the jobs you want them to do. And you'll notice here I'm touching into the gold color. I'm not rinsing my brush, I'm moving along because I just want to pick up a little bit of that to touch into my other buildings. And it goes a long way. You don't need a lot of paint for these. And you can make lines in your buildings if you want, you know, to make definitions for anything. Maybe this one has a big old balcony on the top. So once you've got your basis down, your moon, your sky, throw in a few buildings, then you can start to fine tune. And it's, even though this is harsh, I put a lot of water on, it is buckling. That makes it a challenge to keep everything on a nice even horizon. But that's okay, because once it's dry, you can go back in and change that. Just with a damp brush, the flat brush, again, as fine as you can get it on the end, and then you can go in and make lines. You can pull out pigments that are there. And even once they've dried, you should be able to, for the most part, pull a fair bit of that pigment out. There are paints that are staining, and that makes it impossible really to get all of it out. But sometimes you just need that little hint of things coming out of them. So I like to see a lot of buildings there with kind of even tops. So I'm going to just make an extra one here. And then we'll make another one right beside it. And if your paint on your side gets too dry, you can just give it a little spritz. Doesn't take much to wake it up. Okay. Now, as with our trees, we are going to want to see light on the side where the moon glow is coming. So now is where you can go in and lighten these sides of your buildings. So just pulling away. You still have that bit of color in the background for the buildings, but you're pulling away, you're lightening a little bit. And you can go back in with your credit card, add more darks to the other side. Change up the textures, change the direction of how you've laid the paint down to begin with. Change the surface by using a brush rather than your credit card that's going to lay. The credit card will lay the paint beautifully on the surface of your paper. Your brush will help you to smooth out some of those edges and texture them across. Now, we have a fairly large building here. It probably shouldn't be left completely white, so I'm just going to pull some of that color across. I'm not going to be real specific about making it really smooth. Buildings have uneven surfaces, uneven textures. That's a bit of actually Aussie gold that popped out on that corner there. I'm just going to put a wee bit of that in. And they'll all look like buildings in the night. You can see here where this building probably would be better off if it was two buildings. So I'm going to just make that happen. And I can go back in with credit card and just make that. All right. Once you've decided what your foreground wants to be, you can work into it. I don't mind that it's just left a light blue. I love how these colors want to come out of the buildings and just flow down. And it's very abstract-y. I'm going to bring a bit of that purple in from the building over there. When you're making, when I'm making these, you can do whatever way you want. I prefer to keep the lines as straight as I can. I'm not always great at doing that, but I do like to see that happening. For me, it just is the way I prefer to see things. Now there's enough pigment there that I can drag these right down through, almost like a vignette on the bottom. So you get the idea of how that can happen. And I'm just picking up a bit of that paint and bringing it over to this side. This is like the hint of a rope or something going across there. And again, you'll learn as you get to know your pigment and your brushes and the surface that you're working on, the ratio of water that gives you the result that you are hoping to see. So this is how I would treat this. Oops. the basis for this cityscape. And I put a bit of the Aussie red gold there. I don't want much, I just want a hint. Just over here. The Aussie red gold is a very strong color. And so as I've put it down here in the bottom, I want to add it just carefully up at the top. It doesn't hurt every now and then to just put a bright bit in. So I've got a bit of bright happening there. Let's try some maybe on that piece and perhaps up here. Trying to get some balance and have things playing off each other a little bit. And as you add the colors, the richness of the paper kind of changes as well, I think. And a paper towel. Always handy to have that. And I think this building could have a little bit of stronger color there. So that's, you know, got my buildings going in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. I like that. So with this, I'm just going to bring a horizon line back just a tiny bit. I want to go back into that neutral, pardon me, that Payne's blue-gray. I want to call it neutral gray. And it's mixed with a little bit of the purple. And because it's on the edge, I don't mind that it's a bit darker. It'll help to frame the piece. And that's not going to be as straight as I want it to be because it's, pardon me, it's buckled, but that's all right. We'll work with that. You can see by adding that Payne's blue-gray, whoops, see there's me not making a straight line again. But I want it to be straight there, so I'm going to bring that down. You can vary your lines in length. And I can see the base of that building needs a little bit of help. So I'm going to take the Payne's blue-gray and I'm just going to set my piece of plastic down with the paint on it and just pull that up. And as I pull it up through the other colors that are there, it gives a beautiful, it's almost like when we make the rocks with these pieces of plastic, right? That building's going to be in the background, in the shadow, and then we'll pull some of that shadow across the lighter Aussie red gold and Quinacridone gold in the background. You can see the palette dirt. I call it palette dirt. It's so handy to have. I just love that, you know, it's there at my disposal. I can dip into that and use it whenever I need to. And I'm just going to I want to try to define the edges of some of these buildings just a little bit more with a bit of darker color. Also, because they are anchored down below, I just want to make sure that there's a bit of shadow happening at the base of the buildings. So we want this to be a little bit realistic. We don't want it to be completely unrecognizable. So by adding just a few of the details that we normally often overlook in life, like shadows and how that helps to create scenes. Little bits of plastic, great tools for shaping, for carving, and you can get as adventuresome as you like with these colors and pull them down and watch how they play. It's just now what I'm using here is the Mayan Dark Blue and the Indanthrone that I'd mixed earlier for the sky. And there's still a bit of liquid there. And so I'm just pulling this down into the water area. With a dry brush, I'm going to soften those edges even more. If I was to use a damp brush, which we have from when we did the sky earlier, I'm just going to dry off a bit more of the water, and that will help us to soften those edges even more if we want to bring them down. And smooth things off a little bit. If you find, as I see here where it's gotten a bit dark and muddy, if you clean your brush, take off most of the water, heavy pressure, and lift it up, you'll be able to remove some of that and soften it even more. Okay. Now, if you wanted this to be less vignette-y and less abstract on the bottom, you could certainly fill in this whole piece at the bottom with color. For now, I'm going to leave that. And I want to go back to the sky. And just turn this a tiny bit. So there's lots of ways you can approach your moon. And I thought maybe today we could have some fun with just bringing a bit of that quinacridone, no, pardon me, the Mayan Dark Blue and the Indanthrone. It's what we used in the sky. And I'm just, my Levinson brush, I didn't wet it, I just dipped it into the wet Mayan Dark Blue and Indanthrone. And I just want to test that on a piece. There we go, it's light enough. So moons are full of craters. Moons, the moon is full of craters and shapes and so I'm just very, very lightly adding a little bit of color to the moon. Take your time with this. Lots of room. And now I'm going to add just water to my brush, and I'm going to start moving that around inside that orb. Okay. And just by wiggling your brush gently inside that circle, you're going to get that wet surface where we can start dropping in a little bit of darker color as well. So just not dripping wet, just enough water to fill in that circle. And now that the sky part is, for the most part, dry, it's still damp, but it's pretty dry. Where we lay water into this circle is where the pigments will follow. So I'm not going to go quite out to the edge with that yet. I'm going to be as careful as I can, just bringing the water as close to the edge as I can with the tip of my brush, just laying in the water. And you can see I've already got a little bit of shading from where I laid the color in initially. And if I just go back in and touch in a few spots, you'll start to see shapes and craters and different things form. I'm trying not to make a face, but every time I look, I see eyes and a nose popping up. So the man in the moon is on the job. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that for now. It won't take long for that to dry, and then we'll take a brush and we'll soften the clouds and maybe make some go over the top. So this brush feels just slightly damp. I'm just going to go back in and feather just a tiny bit here. Let's see if there's any edges that need to be buffed out slightly. I don't mind that there's a combination of harder edges and softer edges. This is a great brush, as I mentioned, for pulling out color, chiseling edges, that kind of thing. There are others. This is a Denman brand brush. Comes to a pretty nice fine point, and it's just got, it's a smaller edge, and so depending on, you know, how big a line you want to make or how small a line you need to make, you can go back in, like I say, just dip your brush, dry it, make sure that it's got a nice edge on it, and you can define those edges, the shorelines. This one's coming right out to the front. I love that it's kind of like drawing. So I don't draw ahead of time. I like to carve my picture, my design out of the pigments that I've put down. So it's kind of almost working in reverse sometimes. But that allows me to work with the pigment on a different level. I think I'm giving the pigment more freedom to do what it needs to do, and then I'll come in afterwards and impose a little bit of my ideas on top of that. And I kind of like that. I like that partnership. I love that relationship that kind of happens. And it's a learning process. I mean, my pigments teach me something new every day, and I love that. Some days it's like, oh, of course, why didn't I know that before? And other days it's we're just working together to create you could do all kinds of things. You could add another another bit of interest up here. Put some levels of things in if you wanted to. I like to just pick up the paint sometimes from what's on the surface if my brush is just damp enough. And I can just get enough there. And as I'm creating, again, my challenge is usually trying to make the lines straight. But you're picking up this, you know, the same colors. And perspective's not my strong suit, but you know, you can make all kinds of things. So basically sketching with the paintbrush. And by doing this, using the colors that are in your painting in front, you're keeping things cohesive. You're giving another element of depth to your to your painting. These little guys are in the background. Nice shadowed effect. Things in the distance are a little paler. And I keep wanting to dab in my palette, but I want to stay using what I have on my surface here, just to bring those colors over. So you're creating another whole cityscape in the background with just the colors that you've got on your surface already. And with just a damp brush. And as you're clearing out paint from these buildings, you're able to create these buildings. And it's time to turn the page around, just so we can get a bit of a flat surface. It's hard to keep it straight. Have I mentioned that? Okay. Let's put another shadow building back here. And maybe we'll do another shadow building over here. Just to give you the hint of that something's happening back there. Okay. So you can look at these and decide whether there are too many white spaces that you want to fill in, how you want to change things up. Often, as I've mentioned in the past, I will take a photograph and step away from my painting for a while. Come back and it'll be, you know, quite evident where I need to make changes or make additions. If you see anything that's glaring. But I think it looks like our moon is dry enough now that we can go back in. Just going to make sure all my brushes are clean. Nothing worse than picking up a brush that has a surprise on it. You could also go in with a pen afterwards and draw windows if you wanted to, details onto your buildings. Okay, Okay, this brush is a little bit on the damp side, but I don't want it to be too wet. This is where you want to be as gentle as possible. And by having it too wet, you're going to create more blooms in your background. You just want to add the hint of a cloud or two coming in front of your moon. I don't mind that the edge has a little bit of darkness around it. It's all adding to the texture. And as we did down below, we're just going to feather a very light touch. This is where you really want to be light with your paper. As I say, the paper is delicate. You want to be gentle with it. If you're scrubbing away at it, you're going to damage it. So. All right. Now, having looked away and come back, I can see where I have a very purple bit of stuff going on here, and I really don't think I need to have that in the background. So I'm going to see if this is one of the staining colors and if we can remove it or lighten it. So I'm wetting it basically just with water. And I'm going to come back in with, let's try some neutral tint and see if that doesn't help. I'm just barely getting any on this little flat brush. And I'm just going to mute that down a tiny bit, as I will with this one. And because it's the same height as that one there, I'm just going to change that over a little bit. Yeah, it's still a bit on the purpley pink side, but that's okay. We can live with that. As watercolor dries, of course, it does change. And lighten, so that is good. Just a bit of water, and we'll pick that out. There we go. All right. You could also go in with gouache, drawing some white dots for windows. No end to what you can do. And I'm just, because I've got purple over there now, I'm just going to come in and, so we're improvising. We're going to go with the flow and see what happens. With buildings, of course, you've got shadows and angles, and I'm sure an architect would probably not be sure this was even a cityscape, but it's my cityscape. All right, so this gets you to a point where you can take a photo, step away, come back at any time, add, subtract. You've created a city and had some fun doing it. Thanks for joining me today, Accomplices. I'm glad you were here as we explored another phase of our watercolor journey. If you like what you've seen, subscribe to my channel or visit my website, bandraistudio.com. That's BANDRAOI studio.com.